it was usually in the evening. We'd take her to the coast or to New Orleans or Slidell or wherever. And we'd get back really late. But she was wired. I mean, she had just spoken and she was just on fire. She was ready to talk some more. And so she and AP would go on for hours talking about World War II and talking about maybe World War III. They even got into at one point. What would happen in World War III. And my eyes would be drooping and my head would be nodding and I'd be ready to go to bed. But it was a precious time, and I tried to write a few notes down so I'd remember it, because she said so many blessed things during that time. One other speaker we had, I remember right before she was going to speak, she asked me if I had any preparation H. And I thought, oh my gosh, this poor woman has to get up and talk for an hour, and she must be so uncomfortable. Well, I gave her some preparation H, and she patted it under her eyes. So she I had never heard of that. Well, all this while, my dad is still fighting God. You know, all these things were going on, and my dad was living in Biloxi, and he was still not hearing anything I was saying. I'd go to visit him, and I'd tell him all the wonderful things God was doing, and I could tell it was, just going over his head. He didn't want to hear about it. And he lived down in Biloxi, and we made weekly trips down there to take him to the grocery and to the doctor and to wherever he had to go. And his favorite place for lunch was Barisef's. Do y'all remember Barisef's? It was a precious little restaurant right on the water. And the waitress, I think her name was Dot, as soon as he walked in, she would run over to him. She had blonde hair, and she was so cute. She'd run over to him and hug him, and of course he loved that. And she would give him special coffee and all this stuff, and he had a wonderful time in there. But it wasn't always pleasant going over there, because he did not like air conditioning. And he didn't have air conditioning in his home, which made the day very long. And he didn't even want me to turn the air conditioning in the car while we were driving, because it just bothered him. So one particular day, I remember when I went over there, I had a splitting headache. I just felt terrible. And I didn't want him to know. I mean, he didn't need that added burden. But after we did the things we had to do, we got into Barisef's. And I was trying to cut his meat and do the things that I needed to do, and he couldn't hear at all. So, I was really talking loud to try to have him hear, and my head is just pounding all this while. And in the middle of the meal, a couple came over to us. I don't know where they came from. I hadn't seen them before. But the couple came over, and the man engaged my dad in conversation. And the woman came over to me and put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Thank you, dear, for being so kind." And with that, they turned around and walked out of the restaurant. And I thought, oh my gosh, who was that? It was the strangest experience I had had, and I still had my headache, but I had an encouragement. It was almost like they were angels that came over and just gave me a little encouragement when I needed it. That ad on TV, encouragement, pass it on. It works. Well, anyway, I also didn't see any change in my dad. But I had a dream one night, and in the dream, AP and I went back to that home where I grew up that I didn't go back to. We went back there, and the house looked exactly the same as I always remembered it on the outside. But we went in. The lady who had bought it invited us in the dream. And when I walked in the house, the inside was immaculate. It was like it had been polished. It just sparkled. It was white as it could be. And I thought about that dream so many times, and I realized that that house was my dad. And the Lord was telling me that not to judge him by the outside, that God was working on the inside of him, and he was taking care of him. Well, my dad died at 89 on Christmas morning. Not too long after that, AP and I gave a talk on the coast, and a lady came up to me and told me with tears in her eyes, she said, "I used to bring your dad communion." He ended up in a nursing home in Biloxi. And she said, I used to bring your dad communion, and I loved him so. He had such a gentle, loving spirit. And I was so grateful to that woman, because it was a tremendous comfort to me. I knew my dad's okay. I don't have to worry about him. Well, in John 15:16, Jesus tells us, you did not choose me. I chose you to go forth and bear fruit. And your fruit must endure, so that all you ask the Father in my name, he will give you. The command I give you is this, that you love one another. Well, you bear fruit when you allow God to nurture in you Christ-like qualities. Well, I found out this is not automatic. It's hard work. And whether you call it pruning or sanding down, sometimes it's kind of uncomfortable. But when we succeed with Jesus' help, we glorify God. Well, I started thinking about, for this talk, what qualities did I recognize that God was trying hard to nurture in me? Not that he was succeeding, but I could see him working. And one of them was charity. Well, when the children were younger, we kind of formed a group, a community group. There were about, maybe 4 or 5, 6 couples with children, families. And we would gather together every week, and we had prayer meetings, and we had picnics, and we had retreats, and various things. We always had something going on. We even once had a barn raising. One of the couples lived out in the country, and they wanted a barn. So they invited us all over for the day, and there were a lot of us. And the men all got together and put up the barn, and the women were laying out everything on the picnic tables, and the children were all playing. It was kind of like Oklahoma. You've seen Oklahoma. It was like that. It was delightful. But one of the speakers we had was a pro-life advocate, and picking an anti-abortion person. At that time, there was very little said from the pulpit about abortion and what